You probably heard about 1,000 different versions of this story by now, and you probably raised a few eyebrows skeptically and questioned whether or not any of them are true. I won't bother trying to convince you otherwise. Nobody is convinced until they play the game. I certainly wasn't growing up. You see, my parents managed a hotel where throughout the years we heard hundreds, if not thousands of kids, using the elevators to play the supposedly haunted ritual. In case you didn't know, according to the legend, if they pressed a certain number sequence in the elevator, and also made sure that no one interrupted them, there was a chance that they could have an otherworldly encounter. All that wound up being for my father was an electrical headache. Since the hotel was old, a lot of times the elevator would shut down due to the kids mashing the buttons and constantly tromping in and out. There was even one time that a group of them got stuck, and he had to call the fire department to get them out. "What are they hoping to find?" I asked him. "People like the thrill of the unknown, Lindsay. They want to chase after a dream even when that dream can be a nightmare to others," he had said. That description fit my little brother Will to a T. Anytime he didn't have his nose stuck in a book, he was roaming the halls of the hotel, pretending to fight off monsters. For him, things like the elevator game weren't just fun though, it was serious business, especially after his encounter with the tourist. I call the man that we met by that name simply because I never found out what the proper pronunciation of his real name was. All I remember distinctly about him is that he was tall and of Oriental descent, and he appeared to be around the same age as my father. The tourist arrived during a particularly slow season for us, where the majority of the time Dad was trying to catch up on invoices and refurbish the rooms, so he would let Will and I run the front counter. He brought with him only one item, a briefcase with the initials WR, which my brother found interesting because they had matched his own. "Are you a spy? Is that a bomb? Are you here to kill us?" Will had asked, bombarding the man with questions. "What brings you this way?" I asked, not wanting the man to grow irritated and take his business elsewhere. We needed the money after all. "Thanking you kindly. I am of request for one room singular for myself, to finish what started many years ago," the tourist said with broken English as he patted the briefcase softly. "How many nights are you planning to stay?" I asked, typing in the information that he provided. "As many long it takes to finish the game," was his response. That made my brother's ears perk up. "Game? Are you here for a competition or something?" Will asked. This made the tourist smile and he patted the briefcase again. "This have a set of secret hidden rules inside. For elevator game, very important. Only way to win. Took long time to find. Now I can finish," he remarked. "Wow, so you want to find a ghost?" I could tell that Will was eating up every word the man said, but I had already written him off as a bit of a loony. "Good luck," I told him, passing him a room key to a suite on the 10th floor, and watching him move to the elevator. He was also walking with a slight limp. Once he was gone, Will started to pester me with questions about the ritual. How was it played? Why did so many people try it? Was it real? It got to the point that I decided to get him out of my hair by attempting the game myself. "If I show you that it doesn't work, will you stop bothering me?" I asked him with a deep sigh. He nodded eagerly. I rolled my eyes and after checking to make sure Dad didn't have anything else for us to do, shooed him over toward the elevator. Once inside, for a minute he just stared at the buttons and I sighed. "Do you even know the rules?" Yeah, I think we start on the 2nd floor," he muttered as he reached out to press it. I snatched his hand away and rolled my eyes. "It's the 4th floor and then we go down to the 2nd. The elevator doors closed and we began to ride up. When they opened on the 4th floor, I waited a minute for them to close and then pressed the 2nd floor. Then 6, then 2, then 10, then 5, then 1. "You want to try?" I asked him. He giggled excitedly and nervously and did as instructed. It took a grand total of 15 minutes or so to complete the ritual. Each time the elevator would slowly creak its way up or down the shaft, and I held my breath expecting some kind of maintenance failure to occur. Instead, the most exciting thing was that it went to the 10th floor on its own, and Will clutched my leg, thinking that we would find a ghost. But the hallways were empty. "See, I told you it's a waste of time," I said as I reached for the button to go back down. "Wait! Please wait, hold the elevator." Both of us looked toward the closing doors to see the tourist running down the hall towards us. Instinctively, I pressed the hold button, but it didn't work. Instead, they closed and we began to descend to the bottom floor. "I think maybe we should go back up for him," Will asked. I remember the man's face more than anything. He seemed distressed, panicked, fearful. It was unnerving when I thought about it. I didn't like the idea of having to see him again, so I told Will dismissively that he would catch the next elevator. "Can we play again?" he asked nervously. "It's late, bud. We should do homework," I said as an excuse. In reality, I was hoping that he would either forget about it or be too scared to try again. But I underestimated my brother, especially after what had happened with the tourist. It was Dad that made the discovery a few days later, when it was a little past time for our guest to check out. He was attempting to run the credit card information that the tourist had given us, only to find that it wasn't working. "Cheapskates." I remember Dad muttering as he ordered us to go up to the tourist's room and demand an explanation. When we got there, the door to his room was already slightly ajar. I remember pushing it open and thinking that something smelled strange. Will and I took a step into the darkened room, flicking on the lights, and came face to face with a scene out of a horror movie. There was red everywhere. Trails of it stained the carpet and the walls where it seemed that the man had been using his bare nails to scratch in a sequence of numbers over and over and over again. In the center of the room was the tourist himself, his left hand cut off and his eyes wide, with the same expression of fear and panic that we had seen when he was dashing for the elevator door. And on the floor next to him, right before he died, he scrawled a most peculiar bloody message, one that still haunts me to this day. "Find me. Change it." Will became visibly sick as he covered his mouth and went to the toilet to throw up, as I called downstairs to tell Dad what had happened. As I waited for Dad to arrive, curiosity got the best of me and I stepped over the tourist to peer at the note that was left. It looked like it had been written by the hand that was cut off, hasty and jagged letters covering the paper. There were lots of journals nearby and a small hand mirror, even a whistle like the kind you would use at a tournament. This is what the note said. "To whomever finds these hidden rules, please read them carefully, as they are not the regular set of instructions associated with the ritual commonly known as the elevator game. You must enter the elevator on the 1st floor. This part remains the same. You must go to the 6th floor first, followed by the 2nd, the 4th, and the 3rd, and then return to 6. You must step out on the 6th floor with the mirror in your hand and keep the mirror facing the elevator at all times so that you can keep it within your line of vision. Walk in a straight line until you reach the end of the hallway. Walk backwards to the elevator using the mirror and go back inside. If the elevator door closes at any time during this part, you will have failed. Once inside the elevator, you will need to let it take you to the 2nd floor. Once you have made it to the 2nd floor, you will find yourself somewhere that you do not belong. If at any time the elevator stops on the 5th floor, remain on the elevator. There is sometimes a woman that will enter the elevator here and she will attempt to speak with you. Do not speak back. Do not acknowledge her. Use the whistle if necessary. Follow these hidden rules and you will reach the end of your journey. The handwriting was jagged and fast as though the writer had been in a hurry, and at the bottom a signature. It made my heart stop. William. Why was my brother's name on this note? Will stepped out of the bathroom, his face a mixture of sickness and confusion, and I crumpled up the note and stuck it in my back pocket. What is all that? He asked, wiping his mouth and seeing the journals lying in the bed. Take this down to our room, I ordered him, shoving it in his arms. Hurry, before Dad comes, I insisted. Ever the obedient little brother, he followed my instructions without even missing a beat. Over the next few hours, Dad called the police and they swept the room for any clues as to the cause of death. Dad told me that I could go down and get some food or something, but for the life of me, I felt frozen in place as the cops moved in and out of the room, carrying with them different little pieces of bloody bedding or carpet and evidence bags. All the while, my mind kept flashing back to the tourist's deranged and panicked expression from a few days ago when we had seen him rushing for the elevator. Was this my fault? Had I failed to save him? And perhaps, most importantly, did his death have anything to do with the strange ritual that he was obsessed with? With these distressing thoughts swirling around my head, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. The night after the tourist died, I pored through every single snippet of information that I could find on the game, searching for any reference to the hidden rules. I found nothing. In fact, I found less than nothing. Most of the stories were clearly hoaxes, written by internet users who wanted to get a quick scare for a few upvotes. Others were very detailed, almost realistic, but they always included some variation on the original sequence from the first website. That got me thinking through about how in those particular accounts, when a person would get the sequence wrong or do something different, something bizarre would happen. What if, I wondered, they weren't actually doing anything wrong at all, but by changing up the original rules, they were actually unlocking some hidden code? I decided if I was going to learn anything at all about that secret, I would need to see what was inside that briefcase. Shuffling out of my inflatable bed on the right side of her room, I moved over to Will and I shook him gently to wake up. Sis, is everything okay? He whispered. Dad was a light sleeper, and since we all had to share a room in the hotel, I gestured silently for him to follow me toward the door. Get the journals and follow me downstairs, I said back. He nodded and climbed out of bed, his eyes wide with eager excitement. With the notes in hand, we snuck down to the main lobby and I grabbed us a couple of hot chocolates from the snack bar as we settled in the lounge. Will yawned and we placed the items carefully on the table. And then he picked up the mirror and waved it about for a second. What do you suppose all this stuff is? He asked. Well, that's what we're here to find out. I told him as I took the rubber band off the bundle of journals and I opened up the first in the set. Much to my chagrin, I soon found that the notes were not taken in English but rather Chinese. Amid those strange symbols were numbers and other doodles scribbled, almost aimlessly, as though whoever had written this down had slowly lost their mind. Will was looking at the next journal, which seemed like a log of some sort. There were numbers listed 1 through 10 in different variations. Most of them were scratched through. What is all this? My brother asked. The edge in his voice told me that he was both excited and scared. I didn't want to admit that I was too. It looks like they were attempting different sequences to the elevator buttons, I said as I skimmed through the journal. There had to be at least 100 different ways to press the buttons, and if the scratches and scribbles in the journal were to be believed, the tourist had tried every single combination there was. Hey, look, it just stops here, Will said as he made it to the middle of the journal. It was a combination of 624368. And it occurred to me that it was almost the same sequence the note that I had found in the briefcase had. Do you think maybe this is the right way to press them? My brother asked. My stomach clenched. I hadn't expected him to catch that so quickly. I still didn't know exactly what the numbers meant or what would happen if a person did press them, but he was already eager to find out. He bounded from the lobby over to the elevator and pressed the button, shouting for me to join him. "Will, we should do this in the morning," I warned him. "Are you kidding? I didn't wake up in the dead of the night to look over a bunch of boring journals. Let's go on an adventure," he said excitedly. The door slid open and I desperately tried to think of another good excuse as to why we shouldn't do this. "If something goes wrong, we could both be stuck here all night and Dad would tan our hides," I told him angrily. "I think you're just a chicken," he said, jabbing me in the ribs. I sighed and got in the elevator, realizing that I definitely didn't want him doing this alone, and then I pressed for the 6th floor. "So we pressed the 2nd floor next, right?" Will asked. My heart was already racing, especially as we had passed the 5th floor. I remember the note's ominous warning. "Listen, Will, you have to promise me something," I said as the doors opened on the 6th and we looked out toward the empty halls. "Yeah?" he responded, quickly pressing button number 2. If we see someone, just don't say anything, don't acknowledge them, okay?" I told him. Sure," he said with a giggle. We arrived at floor number 2 without incident, but my nerves were on edge. "I'm serious, Will, we don't know why that man died. I don't want anything to happen to us," I said as I pressed for the 4th floor and added, "If nothing happens, you have to promise me that you'll forget about this stupid game. Deal?" The elevator shook. We went to floor 4 and then 3. Now it was time to return to 6, I thought. The elevator paused on floor 5. For a moment I held my breath. The doors opened, but there was no one there. "Isn't this the ghost floor, sis?" Will asked, just about to get off the elevator. "Are you stupid? Stay on here," I ordered him. He laughed again and the doors closed shut. "Jesus, you really are scared, aren't you?" he said as we arrived at the 6th floor for the 2nd time. The doors opened and I looked down the hallway. Nothing. "It's just really late and I don't like this," I told him. He laughed and leaned against the elevator wall. "I think I could do this 100 times if you always made that face," he chuckled. The elevator shook and shimmied and I sighed. "Okay, game's over. Can we go to bed now?" I asked. The doors opened again and he kept laughing, until I noticed that we were on the 7th floor, which was not the final destination in the sequence. I snatched him by the collar and held him back. "Hold on. Did you press for the 7th floor?" I asked. Will stopped laughing and yanked his shirt away from my hand. "I thought you did." "What does it matter? Let's take the stairs up," he remarked. And that's when we heard the knocking. I looked up to see if maybe I was just sleepy, but Will had heard it too. There was nothing around though. "What the heck is that?" Will asked as we walked out on the 7th floor. I kept close to my little brother. Something about this felt very wrong. The hotel hallway was eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of the knocking. I'm sure it's someone playing a prank. We saw one of the guest doors slightly ajar, room 7K. As we passed it by, the knocking increased and Will got curious and pressed it open. I tried to stop him from stepping inside, but instead found myself following in after. Except the room was bare, and I don't mean just without occupants. There was no furniture either, and no windows. As we stood there for a moment in the dim lighting, both of us had heard the knocking again. It sounded like it came from the other side of the walls. "Let's get back to our room," I said. Will nodded and we left the bizarre room immediately. As we left, we heard the noise intensify and become louder. It put me on edge. We raced up the stairs, scared out of our wits until we made it to our floor and I caught my breath. When we got back to our room, neither of us said a word. It was best not to, because I don't think either of us really knew what to say about that. The next few days passed by and I put the game in the tourist out of my mind. I kept the notes under my inflatable bed, perhaps as a memento of the experience. But I had no intention of trying anything connected to the game again. Will seemed to have moved on too, becoming wrapped up in school. But it didn't last. Not long anyway. It was sometime that same week when Dad needed a little help running the counter that we heard that same knocking again. I froze in place, trying to figure out if my mind was playing tricks on me. Dad showed up and said that somebody had checked out, but I was so focused on the knocking. "Don't you hear that?" I whispered. "Well, don't just stand there, go and clean the room," Dad told us, ignoring me. We already knew what room it was going to be. 7K. Except this time when we entered, everything appeared normal. Furniture in place, windows where they should be. As I vacuumed and Will cleaned the bathroom though, there was tension in the air. An unspoken truth that neither of us wanted to confront. Something had happened while we had played the elevator game, and neither of us understood what. And then as we started to leave, Will came out of the bathroom and was crying softly, like the kind of tears you make when you're guilty of something. "What's wrong?" I asked. I didn't want to say anything because I knew you would be mad," he admitted. I sighed and muttered, "Out with it. What is it?" "I've been playing the game every night ever since what happened," Will admitted. My eyes widened and I glared at him. "I just wanted to know if it would happen again. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," he admitted. "Why would you do that?" I asked. He wiped his tears away. "I don't know, I don't know what it was. But when we were here before, when things were different, I felt different too. I know you did too, because I can see it on your face. I need to know how we did that," he said. "God, don't be an idiot. You could have gotten hurt or worse running around this hotel by yourself," I warned him. "No, Lindsay, stop denying it. We experienced something that night, and I think it's the start of something bigger," he insisted. And then he took out a scrap of paper and muttered, "I went through some of the other journals. They had logs in them too. Sometimes they weren't always scratched out. I think that the sequence we had is almost the correct one. And if we figure out what the right one is, then what? We can get scared again, meet a ghost. Grow up, Will," I argued. "Stop trying to pretend that nothing happened." He shouted back and then added, "I know it's real and I'm going to prove it." And then he ran into the elevator and pressed a button. "Will," I chided him as I tried to follow after him, but it was too late. The doors were closing. I saw the bright buttons on the elevator telling me that he was descending to the first floor to start the game. Inwardly, my stomach was churning, hoping that this all was just an elaborate hoax still. I needed it to be okay. I needed what we experienced to make sense. The numbers flickered from 6 and then 2 and then 4, and then I saw it linger on 5 and my heart raced faster. Instantly, I pressed for the elevator to come to the 7th floor, but instead, the lights flickered for a moment and it jumped to the 8th. I didn't waste another moment. I was racing to the emergency stairs to make it and meet the elevator. I arrived just as the doors opened and my heart sank. It was empty. I must have spent at least a half an hour running from room to room, banging on doors and frantically calling out to my brother. And then eventually one of the guests had called downstairs and complained to Dad. His face was one of disappointment and confusion as I tried to explain what had happened. And then he called the police. No ghost got your brother. We probably just have a weirdo in the building. He growled bitterly. It took the cops less than an hour to show up. They got a warrant and started searching from top to bottom for any signs of Will. Dad told me to stay in the lobby or in our room. I knew that he was mad at me. I mean, why wouldn't he be? It was supposed to be my job to keep him safe, and yet instead I literally encouraged this fantasy, thinking that it would all make sense in the end. But now our whole world was falling apart. Nothing made sense, and Will was gone. A few days went by, and despite my father's efforts to keep up the search, the police labeled my brother as a missing person and forgot about him. I didn't blame them, of course. I knew that they were doing the best they could under the circumstances. They checked the security feeds. They made sure that not a single guest left the hotel within a 48-hour period. Every bag, every room, every nook and cranny had been explored. What else was there to do? I knew the answer, of course, even if I didn't want to say it. The hidden rules. They lingered in my mind throughout the entire ordeal. Somehow Will had been right and had managed to cross over to wherever, meaning the only way for me to find him would be to cross over too. It took me a whole day to work up the courage. I wanted to wait until Dad was sound asleep, and then, with the briefcase in tow, I started toward the elevator. This time I resolved that I was going to follow the note explicitly. I pressed the button and took a few calming breaths, trying to convince myself this harebrained scheme was going to work. As the elevator rode down to the first floor, I placed the briefcase down and reviewed the note again. 62436. And then the elevator would take me to the second floor as my final destination. I paced the lobby for a moment, my palms sweaty. I knew that it was not a hoax anymore. I knew what I was walking into, but my brother needed me. So I stepped inside and I pressed the first button. Slowly, the elevator doors creaked close. The next few moments were tense. I thought that I could hear my heart beating faster as we had reached floor 4 and then 5 and finally 6. As the doors opened, my face felt flushed and I was sweaty, but I had to keep going. I pressed down for the second floor and then the fourth and then the third. Nothing had happened so far, and maybe nothing would. I had almost convinced myself that Will's disappearance was still in the realm of factual evidence when the elevator began to move itself toward the 5th floor on its own. I tensed up, recalling the warning about the mysterious woman the note said to never interact with. As the doors opened, I expected the worst, but I was only greeted with that same eerie quiet. The doors lingered open for a second and I reached down to open the briefcase. I was almost there. Now I needed to follow the strange ritual with the mirror. I pressed the 6th floor and waited as the elevator shimmied up. I took a few slow, steady breaths and then stepped out to the hall on floor 6. The elevator doors stayed open. I took the mirror in my hand and slowly raised it to my eye level, just enough where I could see the empty box. And that was when I saw her. She was standing there in the reflection of the mirror, just standing and waiting in the elevator, without so much as a flinching motion. She wore this long white nightgown that went to her ankles and had dark matted hair covering her eyes and pale face. But there was no doubt in my mind. This surely had to be the woman that I had been warned about. I took a few steady breaths again, my heart pounding even louder as I walked slowly down the hall with the mirror facing the elevator. The woman didn't move. It was like she was waiting for me to return. Finally, I reached the end of the hall, my palms sweaty as I struggled to not look at even her reflection, and then I began to walk backward. Why was she just waiting? What did she want? I couldn't hear anything in those halls, not even my own footsteps. The air felt tense. I was almost there. She still hadn't moved at all. Was she smiling now? Out of the corner of my eye, it seemed like she was, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't want to risk even bringing my eyes close to hers. I didn't know what this woman was capable of. All I knew was that she was dangerous and she was evil. Finally, I made it to the elevator. I kept the mirror near to my eyes where I could see that she was standing just behind me at neck level. It was a smirk, I was sure of it. I lowered the mirror down, thinking that maybe this was just a trick of the light. Maybe without the mirror I would return to the normal world. So I tentatively reached my hand forward to press the next button. And then her pale fingers moved past mine in a flash and the woman pressed it for me. Our skin nearly touched and I instantly looked toward the floor, not daring to make a move. The elevator shimmied again as we rode down to floor 5 and the doors opened once more. I got the sense she wanted to leave the elevator, so I scooted to the left and kept my eyes down, watching her bare feet shuffle out of the box. And then at last, she was gone. The doors closed and I drew a sigh of relief and I pushed for the second floor. Finally, this ordeal was over, I thought. But I was only getting ahead of myself, sadly, for as the doors opened to the second floor, I found myself immediately off-put by the way the floor was set up. There were no doors, you see, not like the regular setup where they were all in a row. Instead, it was just a blank wall with no indication of any guest rooms at all. I considered waiting and riding back to the first floor, but Will was somewhere amid this maze, I had realized, so I stepped out and began to explore. The carpet made no sound as I walked and explored the long hall, my eyes always turning back to make sure the elevator was still there. But nothing else ever was. There wasn't even any indication as to where the illumination was coming from. It was just this sort of artificial glow that seemed to emanate, no matter how far down the hall I went. And then I stopped and looked down toward the end of the hall and turned around and looked back at the elevator. I was squarely in the middle of the hall. No matter how many steps forward that I took, nor however many back, it was an endless hallway. And then I heard a door open behind me. "Will?" I whispered, turning toward the elevator. But now it too was gone in this nightmare. Instead, only the walls remained, and a singular guest room. 7K. Again? How could that be if I was on the second floor? I wondered as I went up to it and knocked softly. It seemed to be the only thing to do. And then it opened and I found myself staring at a man that reminded me of the 1930s detective comics, with the fedora and a long trench coat. He was tall, a bit foreboding, but he didn't even so much as make a move toward me as I stood at his doorway, so I figured I should be the first one to talk. "Hello, my name is... It no longer matters," he told me softly as he finally opened the door wider and let me inside. I shuffled in, curious to see how he had set up room 7K. It was no longer empty like when Will and I had visited. Instead, the detective had layers and layers of diagrams, photographs, and notes pinned on the walls. There didn't seem to be a bit of empty space anywhere, except in one singular part of the wall where he had used his fingernails to scratch out a message. "Who is woman?" It read as I sat down on one of the chairs and he went to get coffee, my eyes wandering his messy research. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "That doesn't matter either. What matters is where I'm going next," the detective replied. "And where might that be?" I asked. He returned a moment later with coffee and smiled at me, his gestures and features a bit more shaky now. Was he the one nervous? He looked familiar as I caught his eye and I saw a briefcase next to him on the floor. Was that the same one from the tourist? The one that once had journals in it? "This belongs to someone. You have to return it to them and don't take the journals if you want to see your brother again," he said, passing it to me. "How do you know about that, and how do I find somebody who's already dead? I have that same briefcase. It's what led me here with notes from my brother," I said in confusion. Time works differently when you're inside the game. We no longer exist, and yet we cannot leave this place. I am bound to this place now that we have met. The detective answered before I could even get my next words out. I looked toward his walls of evidence. You came here to find something, didn't you? I asked. All of this felt foreboding, an inevitable destiny that I couldn't escape. His eye twitched. I stood up and examined the photographs. Some of them were just of empty hallways. Others were of the woman at a distance, never in full view, always blurry. Some of them were of me. And then there were news articles of buildings across the world, similar to the ones that I had seen online of different variations of the elevator game. But these were far older, all the way back to before World War I. And in some of those same photos, I saw my brother, trapped in the past, chasing for an exit. But instead, you became trapped, a prisoner to this place. I realized as I returned to the mess in his room. We're all prisoners here, even her, he said with a whisper as he looked toward the wall where he had scrawled his question. Do you think you will ever know the answers? I asked. I think I have them all, but you won't like it, the detective told me. And then he pulled his coat a smidge and showed me a loaded revolver in his belt holster. My eyes grew big as he unhooked it and cocked the weapon, the barrel of the gun pointed straight at my head. He twisted it upward toward his temple and pulled the trigger, blasting his brains out as I watched in numb horror. His body fell to the floor as a limp doll. I darted the room, too frightened to stay another moment. To my relief, the elevator had returned. I took the briefcase and I didn't look back until I made it to the lobby, back to my own world. I didn't stop until I got back to our room and hid the briefcase under my bed again. I was expecting to see the other one where I had left it, but it was gone. Or it had never been there, I wasn't sure. My father came in to check on me. He had a worried look, probably hadn't gotten any sleep at all since my brother had disappeared, and he asked if I was feeling up to doing a little housekeeping. I told him yes, anything to get my mind off of what had happened to Will. He sent me up to the 7th floor again to shampoo the carpets in the room. I almost dreaded going back to that cursed room. But eventually, my sense of well-being and calm had returned. I was safe now in this world. Still, the directions the detective gave me were clear, and I knew that it would be impossible for me to ignore forever, I thought as I brought the briefcase to the room. I had to obey the secret's rules if I wanted to find Will, especially when I found something stashed in the vent in that suite. The screws had been loosened ever so slightly, and it seemed as though it had happened recently. Reaching inside, I found a small paper bag. Inside was a .42 revolver. It had the distinct smell of having been discharged recently. How was this world connected to the one that I had been lost in? I put the briefcase on the bed and looked at the gun a little bit closer. It had Will's initials on it, just like I expected. And then I heard a noise, something from the hall. I turned and looked up to see a familiar face. The tourist. He was alive and he looked like he had come to this room searching for someone. When he saw me, his eyes got big and he grabbed the briefcase and ran. Instinct took over me and I dashed after him. I think I ran harder than I ever have in my entire life. The way that his eyes danced and lit up when he saw, it told me that he knew something. He had answers about Will. So despite the fact that I could only faintly hear his footsteps, I was hauling. I turned the corner and saw him. He paused for a moment to try and consider his next move, and I used that moment to rush toward him. He turned toward me, shocked to see that I was still in pursuit, and started to run again, but it was too late. I tackled him down, my arms intertwining around his chest and fumbling to the carpeted floor. The briefcase went flying. We tumbled and tossed for a few moments as we fell, his right hand reaching for something in his pocket. I got to it first. It was a switchblade. For some reason, I felt a rush of frustration and anger take over me, and I held it next to his skin. "Stop, just stop. I don't want to hurt you," I ordered. Thankfully, he obeyed. He froze and reached his hand toward my face before asking, Why you follow me to the grave?" I pushed myself off of him and muttered, "I came to find my brother, and I knew that you would have answers. What do you mean by that?" He got into a crouched position, wiping the sweat from his brow and muttering, "You're not supposed to be here. Unlucky. I don't give a crap about your stupid ritual. Now, you're going to come with me and we're going to find him together. Translate your journals and maybe piece together what I need to do next," I told him, waving the switchblade back and forth. "No, I cannot leave," he insisted, and it looked like he was going to run again, so I quickly sidestepped and twisted his arm, putting the blade against his back. "Look, I know this is important to you, and you can get right back to your stupid game once you help me find Will," I snapped and added, "Don't make me do this. Please, I just want answers." He hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded reluctantly as we moved toward the elevator. I picked up the briefcase and took it with us and asked where we were supposed to take it. "I do not know. The game is never played out this way," he admitted. Once the elevator door was closed, I slumped to the floor of the box in relief and started to breathe in and out rapidly. That run had taken the last of my energy. "This isn't going to go way you plan," the tourist warned me. I was about to ask him what he meant by that when suddenly the elevator shook, and then it stopped altogether. We were in between floors 2 and 3. It was stuck, just like I had feared. The lights flickered and I heard the tourist begin to chant and pray. "Get a hold of yourself, we're going to get out of here," I told him, making him look me in the eye. He said nothing and just looked at the ground. His lips were trembling. And then the lights flickered again and I saw out of the corner of my eye what was troubling my passenger. We were no longer alone in the elevator. She had returned. As soon as I saw her pale legs and bare feet, it was like pin needles were being stuck against my skin. I was hardly able to move and I wanted to hyperventilate. And the man that was there alongside, a man that I had seen dead only days before, was not offering anything substantial to make the situation better. His eyes were glued shut and he was chanting. We needed the prayers, that's for sure. Because this was definitely something that I couldn't figure out what to do. The woman just stood there and barely out of my line of vision. I knew that her eyes were on me even if I didn't look. She was waiting for us to acknowledge her. And that terrified me. I was sure at any moment that she would make a move and reach out and touch me, and it only made me want to vomit. Why was I acting like this? I had nothing to connect her to being dangerous, other than the words on a stray note. Yet I knew it as soon as I saw a glimpse of her, that she was deadly and powerful. So instead, I focused on what I could do. I whispered to the tourist to try and draw him out. "How long have you played this game?" I asked quietly. I knew, of course, that she could hear us, but I figured a distraction might make things easier. After all, we had been there 2 hours stuck and I already knew my cell phone wasn't working. We were trapped until we figured out what she wanted. It was just another part of the game, I told myself. I had to keep telling myself also that it was a game that could be won. After what I had seen happen to both the tourist and the detective, I wasn't so sure. "Years," the tourist finally said after what had been the longest pause. "Why? What's the point? What are you after?" I asked, scooting closer. Difficult to explain in mere words. There is more to it than just an end goal. It is an experience that cannot be rationalized. You have felt this too. This is why you are here," the tourist explained. I couldn't deny that. More than anything though, I wanted to find Will and get him back to our side. But now that I think on it, I have grown to understand a little about what the tourist means. It's enticing. These kinds of secrets. You think you understand the world and how things work, and then you see or feel something that doesn't fit, like a woman standing in an elevator, just standing and waiting for you to open up to whatever is beyond your reach. That sort of beyond is downright terrifying if I'm being honest, because it can't be sorted out. It's an infinite unknown, and it's like a black hole, drawing everything and everyone into its hungry maw. "We are going to get out of here," I told him. The tourist didn't seem so sure. "It's not possible. Told you already, it won't let me leave. And this is karma, bad karma for even attempting it," he said, shaking his head vehemently. "We can do it if we work together," I told him and pointed slowly toward the roof of the elevator. "There was a case of some kids that got trapped in here a few years back. Dad had to climb down the rope and haul them out. I saw him do it too, and I know there's an emergency release button for the doors on every floor," I told him gently. "You think escape that easy?" He laughed as he pulled his legs up to his shoulders and crouched in fear. He was paralyzed with indecision, convinced that his fate was already decided. Maybe he wasn't wrong. I had to see him die. Could something like that be erased? I had to try. I stood up, focusing on the latch overhead. It wasn't very big. We would have to slip through one at a time. "You're going first, and then you help me and pull me up." He continued to shake his head no, and I sighed, realizing that he needed some kind of convincing, and sadly the only thing that I could threaten him with was only mere feet away. "Listen to me, if you don't do this, I'll make sure that you talk to this thing and get stuck here forever. You hear me?" I snapped. The tourist stopped shaking and thought about my warning, and then he got up and nodded vaguely, keeping his eyes on the floor. "I will help. You will not believe until you see for yourself," he remarked. I didn't have time to ask what he meant by that, so I cupped my hands and gestured toward the ceiling. "I'll boost you up," I told him. Just as he was getting ready to lift up, I felt the girl move closer toward me. Was she alarmed by the fact that we were leaving? I could feel her breath on my neck. "Let's go," I urged the man. He used his nimble fingers to push the latch open and then carefully slid it open, giving us a view of the long, endless chasm that stretched down above. It seemed to go for miles. He tossed the case up first. I wobbled a bit and pushed him up, encouraging him to climb. I felt a cold hand against my shoulder. She whispered in my ear, "Don't go." It felt so terrifying. Such a simple phrase. I wanted to respond. It took all of my willpower not to. "Help," I urged the tourist. For a sharp moment, I thought that he was going to leave me there, with her. And then he returned in the crawl space a moment later and extended his hand. I grabbed a hold of it and he started to lift. Surprisingly, for a man of his size, he was able to haul me up with ease. Once on the roof of the elevator, I gestured above to the dim light that was pouring into the shaft from the doors above. "There's our way out." Below us, the girl began to scream. The tourist clenched his fingers against the side of the elevator and muttered, "There is no way out of here." Enough of that, I shouted as I reached in my pockets. The whistle, that might be the only item that I hadn't used. I blew hard on it. The elevator shook and I grabbed the cables and told the man to do the same. Will needed me. I blew on the whistle again once we were against the rope and we had a firm hold on it. And then below us, the elevator dropped and I heard her screams reverberate throughout the elevator shaft, and it seemed to grow louder the further that it fell. "There's the emergency switch. Press it," I told him, gesturing toward the left side of the door. The old door slid open slowly and I saw the familiar drab carpets. Just as they had finished opening, the elevator began to move and come towards us. "She wants us to stay with her forever," the tourist squealed as he clutched the briefcase. "Move it," I told him. We scrambled to get into the third-floor hallway. It was mere seconds before the elevator rolled up to meet us. I collapsed on the carpet and felt certain that the doors would open and the ghost would come attack. Yet instead, as they did stop, I was shocked to find the box now empty. She had vanished. "This is where we die," he muttered. My heart finally stopped, beating like a drum as I looked about the empty corridor. "I don't really care where we are. You need to tell me how we return this thing so we can get my brother back," I said, gesturing to the suitcase. "Won't be possible," he insisted. I sighed, ignoring his banter for a moment as I searched for the stairs. A few minutes later, I realized that I couldn't find them. Then when I returned to the hallway, I found that the tourist was missing, and one of the doors was ajar. "I leave for 5 seconds and you're trying to run," I muttered as I entered the room. And then I froze as I realized why it looked familiar. It was the same room that Will and I had found him in that first night, dead. The tourist was sitting on the edge of the second bed, clutching his briefcase and nervously fidgeting as I entered. He looked toward me and slightly a bit. "I told you not to come. Would be bad, and now bad will befall me. I went against it. Now I am part of it." His English was even more broken than normal. He sounded extremely distressed. "Part of the game? How is that possible?" I asked him. He unlocked the briefcase and took out the notebooks where he had scribbled probably 1,000 times before. "The one who seeks all will come to finish my game. I cannot leave Rome. You must go in my place," he told me. "What do you mean you can't finish? The words didn't even leave my mouth. I turned toward the door only to find it was gone entirely. The room was making sure his destiny came true. "I have become part of the game, but you don't have to," he said. When I turned back to him, it seemed like the man was talking clearer than he ever had. "I think it wanted you to see the consequences, though, of what happens when you defy it," he told me anxiously. There was a knock on the wall where the door should be. "Hide in the bathroom, please. You must hide to live, to finish the game and find your brother," he insisted. I heard the knock again, and it was loud. How did it expect to enter the room without any doors? I hurried to the bathroom and closed the door almost all the way, letting it peek just a tad to see what would happen. I wish I hadn't. The knock came again, and the tourist cleared his throat. "I am ready. Come." Something in the wall moved. It formed an outline right where the door should have been and took the shape of a body. It was tall but had no head to call its own. The clothes that it wore resembled something a traditional bellboy might wear, and in its hand was a long razor sickle, glistening in the dim light. The headless apparition moved toward the tourist, and I watched in bewilderment as the man offered his left arm out to the beast. Without a word, it sliced apart his appendage. The briefcase fell from his severed hand and the creature retrieved it. Then just as quickly, the creature slipped back into the walls. I rushed out to him and saw that he was covered in his own blood. He was crying and shaking in shock. I couldn't tell if they were tears of joy or hopelessness. "The way will be clear to you. I understand it all at last. Thank you. I am free," he said as his lips trembled and he fell to the floor. I looked over to the wall and saw the door had magically reappeared, and for a brief moment, I glanced back at the tourist. His severed hand was moving with a mind of its own, scrawling those mysterious numbers on the carpet and walls in blood as the door hung open, the game urging me to continue. I didn't look back toward the lifeless eyes of the tourist this time. I had seen that before. Now the future was unfurling before me, and it was limitless. I felt like maybe I did have a chance to find Will. I returned to the hall, trying to find another clue. I stumbled backward and saw that the elevator was gone, my ticket back to normalcy. I looked about the hallway, wondering what ghost would come up next. And then I heard it behind me, that same knocking. I zipped through the halls until I could find the stairs. Thank God they finally showed themselves, and I didn't stop until they had made it to the 6th floor. Finally too exhausted to keep going, I collapsed near a window. The hazy red sky beyond my hotel told me that I was still trapped in the game. As I slammed my fist against the glass, I began to cry, wishing this stupid game would end. I had seen death several times and been haunted by monsters beyond imagination. I just wanted to find Will, and so far, all I had done was return the briefcase to a ghastly monster. Now, with nothing to tell me where to go next, I felt that I was at the end of my rope. And then I felt a hand touch my shoulder and I nearly jumped and screamed. It was the detective, except he didn't look as old as he had before. His face was clean-shaven, and at last I realized why I knew his eyes. Will, it's you. Oh my God, I said, holding back another scream. I hugged him as tight as I could, not wanting that moment to end. But as we pulled away from each other, I realized his eyes were tainted with sadness. How long have you been here? I asked him. It doesn't matter. You managed to return the rules to the game. That means that I can finally go home, he said with a smile. But I saw you die. I saw you trapped here, I said. Another time in another place, another game. But rules are made to be broken even if you don't understand the consequences, he said as he passed me something. It looked like the mirror that I used to protect myself when first arriving at this strange place. Watch me leave through this mirror and I can go back to being young. Wait, what? What do you mean? What consequences? I asked. I can return, but you have to stay now. You are now a part of this, and that's how it works. The game always wins, he told me. You have become the ghost. I looked down at my skin and saw that I had been running so long that I was barefoot. My skin lacked color from lack of sun. I probably looked disheveled and defeated, and I realized why the woman from the elevator had frightened me so much. She was me. Behind us, I saw the elevator was materializing, and the knocking had returned. The creature was hunting Will, determined to make sure that he couldn't leave. I'm sorry, Lindsay. I'm sorry I did this to you. I promise that I'll try to find a way to get you out of here, he said with tears in his eyes as he told me to hold the mirror up. No, you can't. Take care of Dad, that's your job now. You must promise me that you will make sure that he's okay, I said as I tried to not cry. My aged brother knew that my father would likely never understand what happened, but no further words were spoken between us. He mouthed another apology as the elevator opened. I saw in the reflection of the mirror that he suddenly reverted to being young again, and then the doors closed and I was alone. The knocking got closer. It overwhelmed me. I recalled what the tourist had said. I'm ready. Come on, I said. And then the headless creature appeared from out of the wall, holding the briefcase and offering it to me. I took it and went to the room where this all began, and sat down and looked at the drab walls and the endless abyss that I was trapped in. Tears in my eyes as I realized that now I was going to be here for God knows how long, waiting for the cycle to repeat. I read the notes, now no longer in Chinese but my own tongue, written by my hand. The tourist will come again and steal this from me, I thought as my fingers tapped against the suitcase. But this time, I must make sure he doesn't leave here with the hidden rules. The elevator game will live on, but the hidden rules must never be found. I was wrong to think they revealed the truth. No, they only make you a part of this sick and twisted nightmare.